Okay, so we're at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to start by thanking everybody again for being here for this meeting. If you can, please mute, that would be great. And thank you for being here to our volunteers and everybody else who is joining us today as well. Thank you. So we'll bring the meeting to order, and then we'll move over to approval of agenda. Can I have a first for the approval of the agenda? Councillor Neal, thank you. Can I have a second for the approval of the agenda? Tara, thank you. And all in favor? If I can see a show of hands for all in favor of the agenda? Thank you. Perfect. And sorry, I should also make note, we have one regret for today, which is Francis Smith, Councillor Smith. Okay, so we'll move into the confirmation of minutes. You have the minutes attached from the previous two meetings, January 14th and February 25th. If there are any changes or additions or deletions for either of these minutes, can you please let me know, committee? And if there are none, if I could please have a first for the approval of both. Thank you, Michelle. And second is Andy White. Thank you. And can I have a in favor, show of hands in favor for approval of minutes? Thank you. Perfect. I've got everybody there, so that carries as well. Excellent. So we'll move into disclosure of pecuniary interest. Is there any here? No? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into delegations. There are no registered delegations for this meeting. So then we'll come into briefings and business. So we're actually, normally we would go to briefings right now, but as noted on the agenda, we will go over to business item A. And so I will hand it over to Ruth for business item A. Following business item A, the committee members will have the opportunity to ask questions. And following that, if there are any members of the public who would like to speak, you'll have up to 5 minutes, each member of the public, in order to speak and ask questions. And all questions will be answered at the end. So once everybody has had their 5 minutes to speak, we will do that again following business item B. And now what will happen after business item A, just so everybody's aware, is following that, we will move into briefings, and then that is when we will do briefings. And then we will move on to business item B and business item C. And at each business item, we will go back to committee members for questions. And then following committee members' questions, I will ask the public for questions as well. Okay, so we will move straight into business. Ruth, hello. And I will hand it straight over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I actually also would like to share that we have a couple of colleagues on the call today. We have CEO Lenny Hurdle, also our acting solicitor, Mr. McLeod, and a couple of my other colleagues that have been working on several reports that are on the agenda today. And this first item is actually an information report in response to a motion that was passed by Council back in September, on September 15, 2020, regarding both kind of, or basically requesting staff to do some further work on reviewing the United Nations protocol regarding homelessness encampments. And also look at our own process regarding encampments in our community. So in front of you, we have a report that has highlighted kind of our review of the United Nations protocol. And again, it's been a bit of a team approach across different departments. And also we have added a encampment protocol that we've created to really highlight kind of the steps that we would follow should we encounter encampments in our community. I think I will pass it over maybe real quick to CAO Hurdle as well and see if she has anything to add. I think again, the report speaks for itself. I'm sure you will have some questions and comments, but before I do so, I might pass it over to CEO Hurdle if she has anything to add.
Thank you, Director Nordegraaf, and I'm happy to be here today to have a chance to speak to the committee. So maybe just to add a couple of points, we did review the UN protocol, but we also reviewed a number of best practices across the province. And one of the reasons why we've looked specifically at Ontario is because we do have the same legislative framework where sometimes in other provinces legislation may differ. So we wanted to make sure that we were looking at something that we could compare to. The draft protocol that we have put together, I think, will be helpful to clarify the process. And I think last year that's part of what was missing, people not being clear on what the process was and the steps that the city was going to take. So the intent here is to clarify the process, but also make sure that we are in line with other best practices. And one of the things that we've observed, obviously, with the other best practices is that they take a team approach when working with individuals in encampments. So it's very much an approach where you have agencies that are quite supportive and often the first point of contact to try to provide those support services before getting into the level of enforcement. I do want to indicate that all of the municipalities that we have reviewed had this particular approach where they would try to support first, relocate with their partner agencies, but they were not allowing encampments in their public spaces. So they got to a point where eventually they would move to relocation. The time frame varied from municipality to municipality, but I just want to point out that that was a commonality across the board. So I think with that, I'll leave it at that, and we'll be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, CEO Hurdle. Do we have questions from committee members regarding business item A? I see Councillor Doherty, and if anyone does have questions, if you want to just lift your hand up and I'm going to make note, we'll make sure everybody's questions are heard and answered. Okay, so we'll begin with Councillor Doherty, and then we'll have Andy White following Councillor Doherty.
Yeah, thanks for the report. It was interesting. It didn't read like, besides a little bit more of a team approach, it certainly didn't read like the other communities didn't really offer. Nobody offered this is a great example, like a best practice that we should all implement. And unfortunately, there was no, perfect solution that anybody offered. But we've done a lot of research and we've heard a lot learned a lot, I think, throughout the year. That made me wonder about a couple of things. First of all, sending bylaw officers to give notices of eviction. I just wonder if there is a better approach to do that, and if those bylaw officers would there always have like a support worker with them, and what kind of training do any of the staff, including the outreach workers, have when it comes to trauma informed approaches and like an empathetic and compassionate kind of approach. I am really concerned about the fact that we're still proposing to send bylaw officers. I think we all recognize that a lot of homeless people struggle with mental health issues, but homelessness itself is such a stressful situation to be in. I think we got to do everything not to add to the stress. So I wonder if you could address that, and if that was discussed, and if there could be other approaches available.
Please go ahead, Lanny.
Thank you, and through you. So those are very good questions, Councillor Dorothy. And we did discuss a number of those. So first of all, yes, the intent is to have outreach workers with bylaw. So bylaw would not, the intent is not to have bylaw go and attend to a site where we may have people camping on their own, that they would have an outreach worker. The intent is also to have the outreach worker be the first point of contact in communication. As far as their training, I'm not sure. I'm probably going to have to defer that to some of my colleagues. But in terms of providing a notice, I believe that only bylaw officers can do that. We can't, and I'll have to look into it. I don't think it can be done through other staff. And that's part of the issue, I think, that we're trying to deal with. And one of the things that we've heard last year was to make sure that people were provided with clear information. So part of what we're trying to do here is remove uncertainty, and where people weren't sure how long they had and, you know, where could they stay. We're trying to remove that level of uncertainty to provide that clear information. But and maybe legal can correct me if I'm wrong. I know that Mr. McLeod is also on the call, but I do think those notices have to be provided through bylaw.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, CEO Hurdle. Yeah, the benefit of having a bylaw enforcement officer do a formal process like this is they are trained and experienced in managing situations that there might be a challenge or there might be a unhappiness involved. But the other thing is they are trained also to record the event. So if there is an explanation later down the procedural road that has to be given, it's given by somebody trained in the ability to explain activities, take notes as they are occurring or soon thereafter, so that the proper story is told.
So could it be that bylaw officers maybe don't wear their uniform, but maybe plain clothes to kind of policemen in a sense? Because I can only imagine that it would really induce a lot of anxiety. And so maybe it's just the way that they're dressed.
Through you, the Chair, again, one of the characteristics of somebody acting in an official duty like that is the embodiment of the uniform. And by that, I mean, it might be actually the opposite that you're concerned about, Councillor, it might occur, is that if somebody isn't properly attired and not presenting themselves, there'll be confusion as to who they actually are. And as I understand from the protocol, by that point, we are a number of steps down a road. So while I think it is entirely appropriate to require and support the idea that there should be kindness and consideration be given in that moment, clarity is also important. And if the presentation of a uniformed officer can be done in a way that is not objectionable, I think that will be a goal. But if there was less formality, without being strict is what I mean, there might be a confusion at that moment, and that could make a more unhappy situation.
Well, maybe I can just add to that. I just would like to say that we will look into that, because I know last summer we did have police officers that were in plain clothes that actually attended to the site. And I think that that probably worked a little bit better. So we will definitely look into their ability to come to the site in plain clothes, and also if there's any ability to have notices distributed by non-bylaw officers, but that one I'm not 100% sure, but we'll follow up on that.
And I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Through you, Madam Chair. I think to add to Mr. McLeod and CEO Hurdle, in addition to that, we also are continuing to work with, for instance, colleagues from AMHS. Last year, for instance, the staff from the MCERT team helped in certain situations again to support the clients. And in addition, we're also looking at ways to work with, for instance, even our staff at the Housing and Social Services team to have additional staff involved in the process. Again, through the trauma-informed kind of process as well. But we're certainly taking away these items, and that's obviously why we're also putting this in front of you today.
Thank you. Councillor, did that handle those questions for you? Perfect, thank you. Okay, so next on my list was Andy to speak. Now, I think I saw a few other hands go up. Following Andy, we have Councillor Neal. Is there anyone else from the committee with questions at this point? Michelle as well. Perfect. Okay, Andy, if you wanted to go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for giving me the opportunity. With such short notice in being able to review all this, I've noticed that it seems to be all one-sided. It seems to be on the approach of how and when people are going to get evicted, with not much information in regards in who will be supporting, what times and dates are going to be put in place for people having to move. Why are they going to be evicted? This whole report, I feel, has just been rushed, and nobody has been given the opportunity to really voice what needs to be voiced. Why are people going to be evicted, to be moved somewhere else, to set up camp, and then be evicted again? Why isn't the city actually stopping and looking at other alternatives instead of getting prepared for when people are going to be in tents and trying to make their way through and get something better? That is my whole complaint about this right now. Nobody is looking at this in a positive manner, apart from let's get ready, and these are the things that we're going to do to evict people. So my question is, I noticed there are some people are doing 14 days. On here, it looks like you're going to give notice in 48 hours. And there's a big issue in this city, and I feel it's time that we actually stopped and really looked at it instead of just hurrying things and pushing things through. There are a lot more organizations and groups that should be sat here right now being able to have an input. So my question is, I'd like to know what amount of time people are going to be allowed access. And then later on, I'd like some of the people to actually tell me about how you're going to organize the community to all get together and help these people that need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you. So who from our staff is willing to speak? Thank you, Ms. CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you and my colleagues can definitely jump in on the more of the detailed approach as far as support services. So there are a couple of things that I think are fundamental, and that's, you know, we talk about the right to camp. Right now, the city bylaws that we currently have in place, like all other communities that we have researched, do not allow camping in public spaces. Now, having said that, City Council definitely has the authority to change that if that's a direction that they would like to go. From a staff perspective, we are not recommending that change to our bylaw. That is definitely not what is being done in other communities. Because I think what other communities are trying to do is trying to find better alternatives than people living outside. And that's what we're hoping to that we can do. So do we have answers for every single situation and ideal situation? Probably not. We do have services with our shelters. We do have services with the integrated care hub. We also can provide, depending on the situation, access to hotel, motel, which we have done in the past year. And also housing is an option. So we definitely want to make sure that we try to find better alternatives than living outside. And as far as the detail in terms of approach, how individuals are going to be approached and supported, I think I would have to turn that probably to the housing social services team, who have been a lot more involved with the details.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So I think we all agree that our approach is that we want to solve the overall homelessness issues in our community. And again, I think Councillor Dorothy mentioned this in her introduction. I think we all wish there was a perfect solution, and we have not seen one in other communities that we have been able to implement in our community, or so that's, I think, that the first thing I would say. Secondly, as for the timelines, again, in our research, looking also at other communities, the timeline of 48 hours is definitely something that we are seeing kind of across the board. Again, it goes back to kind of giving clarity and giving people again, some time to organize themselves and for us to provide the appropriate services. And again, as I mentioned before, we have multiple agencies that we work with. We have a street outreach team that comes and supports. We also, as you might have seen in the report, identified that we want to extend the street outreach services and work with agencies to wrap around the appropriate supports. I am going to look at, I know I have some colleagues on the call, Joanne, Boris, and others, and see if they have anything to add to that in particular.
Thank you, Ruth. It's Joanne here. I think, on the time frame, we're talking about, 48 hours being an attempt to ensure that a large-scale encampment doesn't occur for a multitude of reasons. When you look at 14 days, those are for cities that might have had an encampment already in place and are now looking to move people from that encampment. So if that helps, the 48 hours is a way to ensure that we're getting people into the supports and services that they need as quickly and as rapidly as possible. And that's where we look to the service providers that we fund to assist both us and our clients with understanding what resources might be available and then actually assisting them in accessing those resources, with the ultimate goal being that then moves them on a trajectory towards being able to access sustainable and longer term housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy, was there anything else that you had wanted to review there? Did that help?
Everybody's going to talk and say the same things over and over again. I think there are better ways to help people, and I don't feel that the community as a whole has been asked to help, especially with some of the questions that I have seen people email, and there is no response. I've not seen any responses. So right now, no, I'm not impressed, but I appreciate everybody's input at the moment. I am hoping by the end of all this that people will start to have a different approach and a different view to this situation. But thank you for the feedbacks.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Neal, if you'd like to proceed.
Thank you. A couple of things. Follow up to Councillor Doherty's earlier comments. I agree with her that we shouldn't have only uniformed by law enforcement officers going. nor should we have plainclothes policemen. But the reality is that even the police now, when there are questions, and we've heard this from the police chief's delegation to the city, there are questions regarding mental health, drug addiction, anything like that. They have community partners who go with the officers in order to have the full breadth of people to speak and act as advocates as well. And we, in fact, and Ms. Nordegraff or Ms. Hurdle can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's actually the model that ended up happening at the park for park residents. They, when bylaw enforcement went in, they usually always had somebody from one of our partner social service agencies with them because they had already established a rapport with the people there. So I think that model is the model, and we did it last summer, and we should do it again in the future. The other thing, I just want to put in context for people who didn't kind of follow, and most of our residents don't watch council every week. I wish they did, but they don't. The reality is that the encampment began after, with our COVID emergency issues, we invited people to come to and stay around City Hall. That created some complaints. And so the city, in fact, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the city offered the opportunity for campers to go to Bell Park as an alternative to them being around City Hall, where there were issues with health and safety issues, all kinds of things. So that was the kind of how that all began. They were to be out 1st of August. Council, everything we did around Bell Park was a 7-6 vote, but it began with council agreeing to the opportunity to let them stay longer. And then there were all kinds of 7-6 votes to extend it beyond the early September. And we ended up with a 7-6 vote saying to evict them in September. So that's the kind of genesis of what happened last year. And I will like to speak to this, but I see Ms. Nordegraff's hand is up, so I'll give her an opportunity to correct me if anything I said was wrong.
And I also saw CAO Hurdle's hand as well. So we'll start with Ruth, and then we'll move over to CAO Hurdle as well.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, we might have thought the same. Councillor Neal is correct that the situation in Bell Park in the early summer was because of because council waived the bylaw, and it has been mentioned in the report as well. It was really an initial response to the pandemic, and the second component of Councillor Neal's point is correct as well. We are and we have been in the past many years working with street outreach services, and again, street outreach is an integral role in supporting people that are in encampments, and there's obviously a different role for them versus what we as a city and our role is with our bylaw team. But again, there is a very good collaboration and partnership between all the different partners, and as you might have seen in the report, again, moving forward, we are bringing more people together and really making this an encampment kind of strategy, or having multiple agencies part of this approach. We've even seen some really great innovations with some of our healthcare providers. And as I mentioned earlier as well, we do have opportunity with even some of our own internal human integration work, where we have potential of utilizing some of our case managers as well to go out and meet with clients. So I just wanted to echo Councillor Neal's comments, because they are correct.
Thank you. That doesn't always happen. Thank you very much. Just a couple of quick questions, and Ruth can stay on unmuted if she wants, because I think she probably will need to answer these. I appreciate your recognition of the UN protocol. That came up with all kinds of people in the community pointing to that last summer. Now, I'm assuming that the suggestion isn't that we met all of those protocol recommendations last year, but in a go-forward basis, we will meet them in the future. Is that accurate? I think I motivated CAO Hurdle. I see her hand up.
Thank you. And thanks for that question, Councillor Neal. I might actually need the support of my colleague, Mr. McLeod, on this one as well. So if you look at the protocol and the review, it does indicate that our practice and protocol moving forward will be meeting the 8 principles. So I want to maybe focus on principle number 3, which I know is the one that people were really focused on, to be completely frank, last summer. And it's also a principle where we, I think, have been able to get a little bit more clarity from a legal perspective based on the case law that's identified in the report that came out in 2020. So it's basically a situation where the city, if a municipality does not provide for encampments or camping in park, we have to provide acceptable alternatives. An acceptable alternative doesn't mean we need to provide exactly what the person is looking for, because we know that's impossible. Some people would say, well, I need to live downtown. I can't live anywhere else than downtown. You know, so what's acceptable is something that's been, I know, discussed a lot over the last year. And I think, I'm hoping that this case law that came out in 2020 helped with some clarity around what can constitute as acceptable. And that's essentially a service that we would provide within our homelessness system. So that could include shelter, integrated care hub, apartment, or motel, hotel. Without specific locations, although that may not be acceptable to everybody. Ultimately, having some form of housing, I think, is the principle that is striving for. Mr. McLeod, I'm not sure if you wanted to add to that. I know you've researched the case laws.
I would just add that the statement of the court is that there is no right to do this, but the principle, as we said in reports last summer, is where there is a right or a claim of a right, it's the obligation to accommodate and meaningfully accommodate. And so what the report shows and what our practices have showed is resources have been allocated, resources have been created to respond to the situation, so that where there's claim that I should be given something, we are giving a variety of approaches which should be acceptable. But as CAO Hurdle says, there's in our legal system, there is a limit to the demand that can be made on the claim. It is a high limit. It is to the point of hardship. We have to accommodate any human right that is being raised. But in this case, we have done it. We are doing it in line with this Toronto case, where it was an injunction brought to stop a park being cleared. The concern there was slightly different. but it was a concern that's connected in the sense that they were concerned that the shelters were places where COVID could be found. The residents had that specific concern. But the response of the court was the same, that these accommodations are created with thoughtful resources and more than just good intention, but real meaningful accommodation to the degree that is available and can be created, and certainly could be created last summer in the context of figuring out how to do this on the fly, as it were, with the new situation facing us. So the court ruling more than confirms that this approach of reasonable accommodation is the appropriate one to take. And it's my understanding that both the practice and the report is setting out how we do it in Kingston in a meaningful way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just very quickly, CAO Hurdle almost guessed right as to the two items I was going to speak to. I'm glad for that background, though. The two that I had some issues with, and the reason why I asked is this on a go-forward basis, was the UN's protocol calls for no forced eviction from a park. And it also calls for recognition of First Nations people. And I know that there were some First Nations people that were at Bell Park. And I also know that, and granted, it was at the 7-6, I believe, direction of council that they be evicted. But the reality is that the way that it was handled back then was a forced eviction. And I've had this argument with some staff before saying, no, it wasn't forced. They closed the park. They wouldn't let me as a city councillor go on the park. And I was threatened with being arrested if I stepped foot in the park. So that, and the fact that they were gathering up all of the tents and everything, clearly was a forced eviction. And that's my concern, is if we're gonna totally commit to the UN protocol on a go forward basis, then we need to do it to recognize that that's going to be our policy. So, and I see I rattled Mr. McLeod's chain, so.
Through the chair, council, you never rattle my chain. These are good questions. I would say briefly on the procedure taken to conclude the encampment, that at that point, we are dealing with, again, the same principle that the court talks about, is that in this point, there isn't a right, there is a need. And so we are having to follow the law of Ontario, even as we look to the UN Charter for, or the UN Protocol for Guidance. On your question about indigeneity, we have a very particular situation here. We had two classes of people who identified as Indigenous, a few residents, but a greater group related to the Bell Island site, which is an important Indigenous site that we co-own with the Mohawk Nation Council of Chiefs. And so the concern had to be, again, just like at the court case, talked about human rights, we also had to balance in that situation. The site contains burials, it's very culturally important and needs to be itself protected from any number of outside influences. And I'm particularly involved in that part of city life. I might just leave it at that. And I noticed that CEO Hurdle also has her hand up.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So just want to clarify that the protocol that we're proposing would still put the city in a situation where we would have people removed from parks if they didn't want to, if they refused to leave after refusing a number of different services. So we're not proposing a change to the bylaw that says people shall be allowed to camp in parks. If that's where, like I said earlier, if that's where council would like to go, then that's a change to the bylaw that needs to occur. And that way people would be allowed to park. We could suggest other services, but people wouldn't be required to move out of the parks. They could stay there for as long as they want, but that's not what we're proposing. I just want to make sure that's clear, Councillor Neal, and I apologize if in any way I didn't explain that clearly earlier.
No, I think clearly you were following a motion duly moved, seconded, and passed by council. I'm not questioning that you and staff didn't do their job, but I still have issues with us if we're suggesting that we're going to follow the UN protocol. I think we have to follow it in spirit as well. And every time Mr. McLeod talks about rights, I think he's talking about legal right, capital R, and I'm talking about what's right, small case R. And that's where we will agree to disagree, I guess. Thank you.
I think I see CAO Hurdle's hand up.
Thank you, through the chair, and maybe that's a bit of a question. The protocol going forward would not allow people to stay in public spaces as long as they want. And I just want to make sure that if the committee is looking to provide a different kind of input, I think it would be helpful for us to know that and for council to consider something that may allow people to camp in parks or public spaces for the amount of time that they wish to. Again, that would not be staff recommendation, but I think it's important that we hear from the committee for sure if that's where the committee would like to go.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Neal, did you have any other? No. Okay, perfect. I do have Ms. McCarty as next for questions.
So I just have a question. So if I'm reading it right, if we're going to have people leaving an encampment, that's to provide them with other services such as shelter in some way. But when you look at the last United Way's point in time count of people who were homeless at that time, you had 81 who were experiencing absolute homelessness, and you had 152 who encountered being homeless in the course of a year. And right now, in total, if you're a single person, we only have 43 beds in shelter. So what's determined, and how do you determine who goes to a motel, or how do we, if we have that type of number, how are we helping them to have some type of housing?
I see Ruth.
Thank you, Madam, and through you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate that question. In addition, obviously last year when we started with, or when Bell Park was initiated, we did not have the integrated care hub as an alternative. So that is, although not considered a shelter, we do have that available as well. And we certainly recognize that we need to continue to work with the shelter system. We also recognize that we are still in a pandemic, so we are working with our shelters. We also do have an overflow shelter in our system right now, which we will continue to have available as needed. So there are a variety of services and options that we are providing to clients. It certainly is an ongoing conversation. We try to really be on top of capacity and look at solutions if needed, and if we continue to be consistently at capacity in the system. I see CEO Hurdle has her hand up as well, so she might want to add something to that.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm assuming that my colleague Joanne Boris, who's also a lot closer to some of those on a day-to-day basis, may want to add some information. But essentially, we look at different services ranging, like Director Nordegraff said, the Integrated Care Hub, which I believe probably on a daily basis, we have between 40 to 50 people that will use the Integrated Care Hub to rest. So not just for other services, but they actually rest there. And this is by choice. And what we found when working with people that were at Bell Park is that they were looking for an alternative to our traditional shelters. That was a much lower barrier. So that service actually is quite utilized by people that typically we would find camping on various properties because of the low barrier component. Then we have the shelter beds, the regular shelters, so we work with a number of them. As Director Nordegraff indicated, we do have an overflow shelter in case the other ones are full. We also have a facility that the city has purchased at 805 Ridley Street that should we be in a really difficult situation and people have nowhere else to go, we could utilize for shelters purpose. We provide hotel motel, and typically those are for people with a lower acuity level. So people with higher acuity, we would have challenges being able to place them in a motel or hotel, especially while we're in a pandemic. So that's why we'll see a lot of individuals, for example, with higher acuity gravitate toward the Integrated Care Hub. So a different range of the options. We also obviously have housing as an option, so apartments, and we have housed people, but we recognize that those may be a little bit longer term options. I hope this is helpful to give kind of an idea of the spectrum of the services.
So the overflow shelter has 6 beds, and you have home-based housing with 14 beds and 25 at the hub. So, and with housing, I work in housing, and you're seeing anywhere from a 3 to a 5 year wait time to get housed in a home. So with the building that you were talking about on Princess Street, that's really helpful to know that that's there if it needs to be accessed.
If I might, it's Joanne Boris. Although it seems that there's a lot of individuals that are currently homeless, and there are, one thing that's really important to recognize is that not all individuals seek services and supports or want to be in shelter. So we haven't actually yet hit capacity at every one of our centers. I know we're questioned on that quite frequently, and we do check on a daily basis to see where we are and how many beds are available. And I can confirm that we haven't hit maximum capacity except at our family shelter. And then we have individuals who are staying in motels. We've got families there as well. So we as CAO Hurdle has mentioned, we are very much on top of that on a daily basis, and will continue to be.
Thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you. Was there anyone else from our committee who would like to ask questions? Oh, I see Peter. Please go ahead, Peter. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Jacqueline. In listening to the discussion, it seems to me that the protocol that's been presented to us is predicated on the current bylaw, and I'm assuming that it's also looking at I'll call it a normal situation, and that it would be it's crafted so that it would be usable after our time of COVID, whatever that looks like. And I guess that one of the things that when I read it, I really quite liked about it was the approach and of trying to help people first, and then if you can't, then obviously eviction seems to be a last resort. And I think that one of the things that CAO Hurdle said is that if we as a committee don't like the premise where this is started, then maybe that's where we should be advising council. But it seems to me we have an existing bylaw in the city that says you can't camp on city property, and we're trying to try and work a couple of ways with this. And it as I say, it seems to me that on the basis of the bylaw, this seems to be a reasonable approach. And the other thing is that we're in a position where, while shelters are sometimes in some difficulty in terms of space, the best people to provide help in a lot of cases are the folks from mental addiction and mental health and street outreach, which obviously is the first point of contact here. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. I have two kind of comments / questions. Well, the first one is a comment, and that's regarding the bylaw regarding camping in public spaces. So over the last couple of years, I've had a caretaker of a facility that where a lot of children attend this facility, and they had somebody who decided to camp there, and the person defecates on the stairs and leaves needles lying around. And I've had this caretaker phone me almost in tears, not knowing how to deal with that. So there are cases that are definitely, we need to remove people, but what I saw about this report is that we're giving thought on how to do that. It's still in a dignified way. The other thing is that I would like to ask a question about, and I see it's a bit problematic when we're talking about an encampment on a private property, and that the cleanup costs have to be borne by the property owner, because CRCA has had thousands of dollars of cleanup costs, and it's it's also a non-profit organization that can't afford those costs of cleaning up after encampments. So I'm just wondering if we could talk about the cleanup costs on private property. And I know, of course, we struggle with costs as it is. And then the other comment that I just want to make, and concern that I have, is regarding the court ruling. And I know we have to balance the needs and the rights of one group as well as the needs and rights of another group. Now, the court ruling is trying to reach a balance and saying, if we give offer reasonable accommodation, they should take it, or they must take it, or whatever. But reading the report, Transition from Homelessness by Dr. Marshall and her team, who's on this call today, it really struck me about the challenge of, just because we give somebody a shelter doesn't mean that we it's not a long-term solution, or not necessarily helping people away out of homelessness. And that's something that is really even needed in this discussion, because when you offer a place, it might be accommodation in another part of town. We're maybe taking a person away from their community, and that adds other mental health stress. So I am a little bit concerned about just accepting the court ruling from Toronto, because we need to learn more about what the team, Dr. Marshall's team, is presenting regarding the transition from homelessness, to make sure that we don't have this revolving door, and that people stay in this constant threat of of lack, like the report says. So they're my two questions. One concern regarding the court order and taking a person away from community, and the other one about the cleaning up costs on a private property.
I see CEO Hurdle's hand. If you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you, Anne, through the chair. I will unfortunately have to leave the meeting in about 5 minutes, but I wanted to maybe start on the question about the cleanup on private property. So, Councillor Dorothy, you're correct that a number of organizations or private owners have had to deal with that. I guess one thing I would offer is if it's a private property or property that's owned by a non-for-profit organization or one of our partner agency, in the case of CRCA being one of our partner agency, we can definitely offer to help with some of the cleanup. So that's something that's feasible, and I believe that our public works team had reached out to CRCA that situation. But when it comes to a private, completely private property, and we know, for example, the Davis Tannery has had encampments for years, that's a difficult one for us because the city has absolutely no control whatsoever over how long people can stay there and what people bring on the property. The only way that that something can be done would be for what we're proposing here is for the private owner to contact Street Outreach as a first point of contact, again, to try to initiate that conversation and support service. But if that's not successful, the only other recourse a private property owner has is to call the police. And again, the police would be joined by Addictions Mental Health, but the city has no jurisdiction on private properties. So it's not, we can't send our staff, and I would say Street Outreach would only enter the property with the consent of the property owner, because otherwise we could be in trouble too. But yeah, so the one with the private property is a little bit more delicate for sure. And the cost as a result of encampment, yes, would fall back on the property owner where it's an individual private owner. I'm not sure if Mr. McLeod wanted to jump in to talk about the court case, I think, which is the other one that you mentioned. And I think the key point is the support services to make sure that people don't fall back into, if we provide them with shelter, how are we properly supporting them through that process? So those are support services so that they don't fall back into an encampment situation again.
And I would just add, through the chair, I would just add, Councillor, that the function of the court will never be to create a holistic policy. That's up to councils, legislatures. What they're saying is there is a limit, but the limit is, if you look at the quotation set out in the report, adequate, safe alternative. It's the concern of the court that there's safety. It's the concern of the court there's inadequacy. At that point, it moves into legislative bodies and those kind of decision makers to flesh out what that means and how the adequacy is provided and how the rights are accommodated if there are rights involved.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty, did that help? Okay. Were there any other committee members that had questions before I move over to the public? And sorry, Ruth, I see your hand. Did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, sorry. And I just wanted to, through you, Madam Chair, add that again, and we have highlighted that in the report as well. We have been working with Home-Based Housing, who has been providing the support services for years, and I think have done an incredible job in supporting encampments on private and city properties. And again, there's many other agencies that have been involved, but I think we do have again multiple services. We also have definitely learned a lot from the Bell Park encampment and have gathered more information and tried to really provide more services to clients, and really trying to provide that wraparound solution. We are, as you know, and we are obviously providing, as you see in the next report, we have a standing update report around the broader homelessness system, and we do recognize that this is not its own standalone conversation, and it really fits in a bigger picture of homelessness, housing, and as much as we want to try to solve this today, we know that we have a lot of bigger system issues that we're trying to address as well. So I think really our focus is, yes, we know we are as staff following a city bylaw, and to CEO Hurdle's point, like, it is ultimately up to council as well, if they do want to suggest that we change that, if that's something council would like to pursue. But ultimately, as staff, we are trying to do our best to wrap around the appropriate services with our partners, such as home-based housing, but also HIV/AIDS regional services, AMHS, Street Mission, and many amazing volunteers in the community that really care about people that are living rough. So it is really a community approach. This is a very challenging topic. Not going to lie, that for staff, there is no perfect solution right now. So what we can do is try to at least use, a client-focused, trauma-informed approach, and really do our best to do the work that we need to do, but do it in the way that's as empathetic as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I agree. And from the beginning, when CEO Hurdle had been saying there has to be alternatives, we must have alternatives to sleeping outside. And that's, my big takeaway from everything. That's the last resort. Okay. Is there any other questions or comments from committee before I open it up to public members? Great. So seeing none, I will ask Elizabeth, our clerk, do we have any members of the public present? And if so, can we find out who would like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We do have a couple of members of the public with us. Just before, I do see a hand raised. Just before I go to that member, I just wanted to remind those who are with us today, if you would like to speak during this portion, you will need to raise your hand in Zoom. To find the raise hand function, you will need to move the mouse over the Zoom window, and it's located in the center of your screen. So, Madam Chair, Crystal Wilson is with us, and she would like to address the committee.
Thank you. Thanks, Crystal. Please go ahead.
Hey there. Thank you for giving me some time. I appreciate efforts that people put into these encampment reports. Unfortunately, what is frustrating me is that we have a good UN resolution to follow and some really poor examples from other municipalities of what we shouldn't be doing. But I think we have an opportunity right now to do better and to set a better example for other municipalities to follow. What's happening in Toronto right now is causing a lot of harm and trauma. Their Pathways program that is forcing people out of parks is traumatizing people. And we shouldn't, people who are living in rough are traumatized, and we shouldn't make it worse. So for those of you who don't know, I've been working with people experiencing homelessness since the Bell Park encampment. At the encampment, they hired me to represent them for $20. So I've been trying to do that. And I just want to say that what has been put forward as ways that we are currently meeting the UN resolution, there are a number of inaccuracies and misrepresentations in that report. And it's very frustrating to me because I've spent a lot of time this winter showing staff and showing counselors how things that are said in reports and in writing aren't matching reality. So things like there's a gentleman who I support who has severe medical challenges, and he just called me. We were in the middle of, I was trying to listen to you, in tears because staff at a shelter are yelling at him, and I can hear them yelling at him in the background, and then it's very frustrating. So as soon as this meeting's over, I'm going to pick him up and remove him from that environment. He's somebody who desperately needs help. He was at Bell Park. He desperately needed help at Bell Park, and the system does not help him. So I want to say that I don't understand some of the things from the report, and some of it is around storage, which we know has been a continuous issue. I personally store people's belongings when I find out that they've been taken by bylaw. I managed to get them back from bylaw before they hit the garbage can. There is no process, there is nowhere in the system that stores people's belongings. Even at ICH, people's belongings are being thrown out. So I think I would like that inaccuracy fixed before this becomes a motion to council. And as well, this hotel program, which I keep hearing about, and it makes me laugh because some of you may realize that I may not all know, but the hotel program that does seem to be working in the city is one that my group of volunteers raised money on GoFundMe to support people in motels through the winter so that they wouldn't lose their fingers and toes to frostbite. And we raised $15,000. We asked multiple times to housing staff, to home-based housing staff, to outreach staff, to ICH staff about opportunities to put people into motels, people who were kicked out of shelter services, people who were kicked out of ICH. Are supported and thriving in the motel environment, but it's coming at our cost, money out of our own pockets to support the supplemental costs, like coffee and different kinds of food that they might need that we can't get from Lionheart or Martha's Table. Significant amounts of money coming out of our own pocket to support people in motels because the supposed city motel program, we don't know where it exists or what mystery place it exists. We currently support 6 people in the motel. 2 of our people have found housing on their own, and we support another 20 people who were placed by city agencies into motels after fires or due to lack of space in shelters, people who were put into the motel and then not supported afterwards. So we actually deliver 26 to 35 meals, lunch and supper, to people who should be supported by systems, who were paid for, whose hotel rooms are paid for by the city of Kingston, and we're the ones supporting them for free as volunteers. So I think before any encampment policy gets put in place, as Ruth said, there's bigger system issues to address, and I don't think that it's fair to traumatize people further, to give them 48 hours to navigate a system that is not working. So get the system working first and then start expecting people to participate in it. But right now, the system that we've seen and we've evaluated, it causes trauma. It causes problems right across the board. The service restrictions that we've seen, we take care of a gentleman right now who was deemed too dangerous to stay at ICH. He's fine. I have tried. I've raised 6 kids. I have tried to push his buttons to see what his breaking point is. He has never spoken badly. He has never even sworn at us. He's never raised his voice. He's never yelled at us. What he needed was to be treated like a human. The system does not treat people humanely. And if you continue along this path with this encampment policy, which is we hear these words about trauma informed. This policy is not trauma informed at all. It'll cause trauma. All you'll be doing is pushing people around the city into different kinds of parks. So let's stop and do better and be better than the other municipalities and create a policy that actually helps people. That's my request. But also my request is when staff write reports to city council that it matches reality. And this report unfortunately does not match reality. It also, as far as I've been able to determine, I'm not sure if they talked to outreach before, but before some of the burdens were placed on street outreach, but I don't know that this report matches what outreach does right now. And from what I've seen, it doesn't. But also the expectation that's being put on street outreach right now it needs to have funding to support it. So if this kind of policy is going to be put in place with the expectations that are within this policy, just even as is, additional funding needs to go to street outreach. They're already overworked. We're supplementing their work, volunteers for free supplementing their work, and we're overworked. So there needs to be a significant amount of funding to have street outreach running around the city, rather than, if you create one space where people can go that's a sanctioned environment, then street outreach can do their job at that environment instead of running around chasing people and trying to figure out where people have moved to next. It's just a poor policy that needs to be at your committee, can be stopped and can be asked to do something better. And that's my request right now. Now I'm worried about my gentleman that's in overflow, that's being traumatized right now. So I'm not being as articulate as I would like to be, but I'd like to go help him. So I'm going to stop.
Thank you for your comments, Crystal. And at the end, if there are other members of the public to speak now, but at the end of that, they'll be addressed. Your comments and your questions will be addressed. Okay, Elizabeth, was there anyone else from the public to speak?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask Angela Solomon if she'd like to unmute herself to address the committee, please.
Hi everyone. My name is Angie. I'm a second-year med student at Queen's, and I'm becoming more and more interested in the work that city and community groups are doing to address homelessness in our city, and I'm learning a lot. So thanks for that, first and foremost. I'm a bit confused. I wanted to ask, I agree that if, encampments in an ideal situation, they wouldn't exist because there would be alternative solutions like you're proposing. But I'm wondering how this year will be any different from the last, or any different than past years. What's the rationale for the assumption that encampments won't be needed? I think we have even greater economic instability in our community, greater job loss, and the issues with people not wanting to access services that are there for them will still be issues. I don't know if they're what has changed from the perspective of the services provided that we think that the encampment won't be needed, or that there won't be people living rough this summer. And that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Elizabeth, is there anyone else from the public to speak?
Yes, Madam Chair. There is Letitia Flett. I'm going to ask her to unmute herself, please.
Hi there. Thank you. I have a very similar question to Ms. Solomon's. Somebody spoke earlier saying that, what happened at Bell Park last year was permissible in the face of the pandemic. I'd like to know what exactly has changed for the people who are experiencing homelessness with regards to the pandemic, because I don't think their circumstances have changed as much as perhaps those of us who are housed and people who have jobs to go to. So I'm curious what exactly has changed for them. And I'm also curious about what services, aside from some more overflow beds and the ICH, have actually been provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, is there anyone else from the public to speak?
Madam Chair, I do see that Mr. Tom Greening does have his hand raised, and I believe that he should be able to speak during public members as well.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Greening. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you. I did hear Angela ask a question about what has changed since last summer. Certainly, there have been some changes in terms of some new services on the landscape that people have touched on. But one of the topics I wanted to quickly mention is with regard to street outreach services. I can tell you that in the past, although home-based housing has coordinated street outreach services and we've worked with partner agencies, I hear such positive stories from our staff in terms of the new level of cooperation and collaboration with organizations like Addiction and Mental Health Services, HARS, and Street Health. In the past, I felt that we often had to really reach deep to try to get additional help to come out with us on street outreach. Today, people are wanting to engage in street outreach services. They're wanting to go where people are. And I've heard so many very positive stories of people whom, I think that our street outreach staff are the right people for the job. They've got the right attitude and the right philosophy. I've heard our staff say that, they've been joined by staff from organizations like AMHS, who've been able to make inroads with people and help people find some solutions, not just to their homelessness, but to other issues that we never saw before. And certainly it's not perfect. There's still lots of people who need help and different types of help. But I did want to say that there is a new level of collaboration and cooperation that I see going on that's very constructive and helpful. And I hope that we can build on that. Last week, I did reach out to our partner organizations who do help with street outreach and asked if we can convene a meeting to just make sure that we can build on what's working well and talk about what's not working well. So I just wanted to, again, that may not answer Angela's or the committee's question totally, but it is a positive development. It's a small step and a good step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greening. Is there anyone else from the public who would like to speak? And I'll ask Elizabeth again. I don't see everyone. Some of the public is hidden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't see any hands. I'm just maybe if we could do one final call. If there was anyone else who wished to speak as members of the public, if you could please raise your hand in Zoom.
We see him.
Yeah, I do see that one extra hand. So I'll ask Mr. Hill if he'd like to unmute.
Hi there, sorry. Thank you for letting me speak. I not so much have a question, but I just wanted to highlight what has been mentioned a few times by a few people in the council and the members of the public, and just say that we'll just emphasize the importance of involving people with lived experience and putting those voices on board when we're making decisions. I feel like a lot of these decisions are things are being talked about from the perspective of your own perspective and things that you've been involved with, but that doesn't involve the people who are on the front lines who are helping, and it doesn't help. Well, I mean, it does help, but it doesn't directly involve the people who have experienced homelessness, who have experienced addictions or mental health and all of that. I think that the council would be able to get a much more powerful perspective, and there wouldn't be this divide between the public and the council if there were more voices heard. And I just wanted to kind of say that that is a really important piece.
Thank you very much. And I agree. Okay. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak before we move into answering the questions from those who already spoke?
Madam Chair, I don't see any further hands.
Okay, perfect. So we had a number of questions there. Ruth, I see you're unmuted, so I will hand it over to you to help answer and direct some answers from there.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, I'm also going to ask if Joanne can join me in answering some of the questions. I've tried to write them down, but I do apologize if I miss any of them. And certainly some of the questions are not as straightforward, I think, to answer, because again, I think we agree that there is a bigger systems piece as well in play. So first of all, on the question of storage, I will certainly take that question back and make sure that I fully understand kind of the issues around storage that were pointed out by Ms. Wilson. Again, from the, obviously the experience with the Bell Park situation, we, and I know there was various information out in the public, but we did relocate all the belongings of members that were, or residents that were at Bell Park, and store those in a city facility and made sure that residents were aware that their belongings were there. And we worked in close collaboration with our colleagues at Bylaw and our own staff at Housing and Social Services. So it always is the focus on, making sure that belongings are taken care of. But if there are any issues, I'm definitely happy to look into that. The points around funding, and again, we definitely recognize the city has only been funding street outreach with, I recall it's about $60,000 a year, which obviously is not a large amount. So we are obviously in conversation with the street outreach team at Home Based Housing and Mr. Greening in how we can make sure that we ramp up and support street outreach services, because we certainly recognize that those are quite significant. It is really encouraging to see that partnership. And again, historically, street outreach services were, I think really the best way forward with street outreach services is that it's a partnership between multiple agencies that are all providing different levels of supports, ranging from health to social services to harm reduction, etc. The question around what's different now versus last year. I think, again, I appreciate that question. In addition to having the integrated care hub, which I recognize is maybe not, again, is not serving everybody, and having overflow, and us having this ongoing relationship with all the partners and really trying to work in partnership. I should also point out that we have a very close relationship with Addictions and Mental Health, who is providing a self-isolation center for people that do need to self-isolate and cannot access shelters. And again, we obviously do recognize that there is still a lot of work to be done to focus on the broader system. I think what has changed is that we now better understand and have better screening and supports in place, such as, for instance, the self-isolation services. So there is, really an outbreak management in place in the shelter system. And I will commend all the partners in public health for really working diligently in working through that. And I'm sure you've seen other communities, and I think we've done, I feel like I need to knock on wood, but we've done really well so far. The points around, obviously including Oliver, including people with lived experiences is a very important piece that we certainly take to heart. Again, we are the funder, and we work with many partners, and through the various work. I know when we were involved in Bell Park directly, we worked on needs assessments and have really engaged with clients. We have done the same with our system review, and we will continue to do the same on this topic moving forward. Even in the standing item update report, you will see that we are planning some engagement sessions in end of April and early May for our system as a whole. So it's certainly a lot of really good points. I feel like I'm missing a few items.
There was a few times mentioned why will this year be different from last year?
Well, it's I think it's hard to tell. I think the point that was made around obviously the ongoing, implications of the pandemic. Again, we're not, we're aware of that. I will say, again, in speaking with our many partners, encampments are not new to us. The pandemic it's not, the pandemic has not started encampments. There were already encampments prior to the pandemic. So I think we just have to be mindful of the fact that this is not totally new because of the pandemic, but we certainly are looking at, how many of our people that we work with are, for instance, in rental arrears and are at risk of eviction. We have, other tools in our, as a community around, for instance, homelessness prevention funding, discretionary residency funding, so we can, again, work on preventing people from becoming homeless. We have a better understanding of the pandemic. I also should say that clients in the shelters and staff in the shelters, and also through the work of street outreach, have been able to receive the vaccinations for the pandemic. So there are a lot of different pieces that we are definitely working on or are already implemented that will set us up for a better support. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, so I I know we're definitely aware of the fact that we still have encampments in our community, but that's not different from 10 years ago. I will pass it over to Joanne because I feel like I'm rambling on a little bit, and maybe I've missed a couple of key points that she would like to touch on.
Thank you, Ruth, and through you, Madam Chair. Ruth is correct. I mean, if what we're keep talking about is what could be different this year, there's a whole host of things. We you know, again, like Ruth, I don't have a crystal ball, but with the number of vaccines that this community is being provided, staff being immunized, the hope is that we will be able to open up some more shelter spaces again and maybe start to move back towards the original capacity that the shelters had by, you know, at the latest the end of this year. That's the hope. And I've heard that is a possibility, let's just say. So, you know, the hope is that we're going to get there. And as Tom alluded to earlier as well, the fact that this system, for a lack of a better term, had no choice but to work collaboratively together and to reestablish relationships or to build new relationships to work with clients has meant that there are a multitude of clients that might not have otherwise been directly connected to mental health supports, addiction supports that we now know are connected to those supports and are receiving assistance the way they want to receive assistance. And that is monumental, knowing that it has been really challenging for a lot of these individuals to face some of the barriers in finding a psychiatrist or having their medication prescribed. The system has really stepped up this year to look at a way to, as much as they can, wrap around every single individual in the community that is looking to access supports. And there's another aspect to this as well, and knowing that we have our Housing First model that is still out there, but that we don't speak very much about and has had tremendous success over the last 5 years. So the reality is that, you know, to access supports and assistance, to be able to be housed does not necessarily correlate or mean that you have to be in shelter. And that's one of the messages that we keep trying to send to people as well, is that if you're homeless, whether you're couch surfing or sleeping rough or in a shelter, you can still reach out to the services and supports and access Housing First assistance to be able to try and find more stable long-term housing. It's a journey, and it's a journey that those individuals take with our service providers, but it doesn't have to be tied to the shelter system. That can be done outside of individuals staying within a shelter setting. So I just wanted to really remind individuals of that. And I think the numbers are astounding, in over 500 or 600 individuals over the last 5 years that were previously homeless and have been able to find housing. So, you know, we have a lot of hope for the upcoming year that there'll not only be more supports and services added to the system in some capacity. Again, service providers are becoming really creative in ways to reach out to people that we haven't otherwise been able to use. So I'm hopeful that by the end of this year, we will see and be on a much better path towards assisting individuals where they want to be assisted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne. So I think, oh, Councillor Doherty, please go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So I just have one suggestion, and that is also, I think, Crystal was speaking to this. The Brantford example talked about an encampment network. And it seems that we need more, and I totally agree with Crystal, more conversations with community groups as well as people with lived experience. And I really like that concept of an encampment network that gets together on a regular basis and takes a look at the system, which we all agree still needs lots of improvement. So I wonder if that could be somewhat included in the proposal of the encampment kind of, I forget what you called it, as we move forward, the document.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, we're happy to look at that a little bit closer and include that.
Thank you. So did we manage to hit all of those questions and comments? I think we did a pretty good job of hitting those.
Madam Chair, I think Ms. White has her hand up.
Oh, my apologies. Sorry, Ms. White, go ahead.
Listening to everybody, I think we've all got a lot of concerns about what's going off, and where the encampment part is happening. Has anybody suggested that it is reviewed after a month or so of it being implemented? Is there no way to be able to actually get everybody together and say, this isn't working, let's start changing it now? The other thing I have is, I believe, Ridley not accessible for living in because of the water damage that happened? So that whole unit there would be non-accessible to anybody. And the fact, like from what Crystal was saying, yes, I've been with Crystal and I have seen the situations that are happening. They were no different than what they were 2 years ago. There are still people who are camping outside of the hub because they don't get access. So there's a lot of things that still need to be sorted out. But again, Ridley, I'm under the impression that nobody can live in that. If somebody can clarify that, that would be really great. I would like to say, whenever I've had any questions and I have dealt with Ruth with our emails, I really, really respect your answers. Even if you don't fully have it, you have really made the effort to find, and I appreciate that very much. So thank you.
To you, Madam Chair. I can clarify the Ridley situation. It is actually accessible. You are right, Ms. Weiss. There was an unfortunate a pipe that burst over the Christmas holidays. So part of it is not available, but our colleagues at facilities have done an incredible job in making, at this point, we have about 17 individual rooms that are available. And again, I touched on the outbreak management. We're also working on a variety of outbreak plans. And I know that this is something that we typically don't talk about because we're just creating all these different plans just in case. And it's been an incredible, challenging year to try to anticipate what we may or may not need. And I don't think we're there yet. So Ridley is available. We are looking at a couple of different options. And as I think people know, we are also looking at a longer term use for this building. And I appreciate your comments, Ms. White, around the communication. And I would encourage everybody, we always, again, if we would have the perfect solution, I don't think we would have been talking about this for an hour and a half. I know we as staff have a certain direction that we follow based on council's direction and existing bylaws. So we always try to be as open and as transparent as we can. I don't think we have anything to hide. I know we work very closely with every system partner. If we do receive specific comments about specific clients or specific situations, it sometimes is a little bit challenging for us to respond to that because we are not directly involved as the frontline staff. So we also always encourage you, if you have a specific question about a specific service, feel free to include us, obviously, but also, we are happy to connect people with the service or clarify some of the questions. So appreciate that. And again, we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think we are definitely making some progress as well on the things that we do in this community. And I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you, Ruth. Okay, so I think we will move forward now. Oh, sorry, Councillor Neal.
Thank you. I was waving furiously. Quick question for Ruth, if I can, and then I promise I'll shut up. I know that one of the main concerns with the people at Bell Park, and one of the reasons why people living in the rough kind of end up in small clusters, is because virtually every couple of weeks, if somebody comes in and cleans out that encampment, those people lose all of their property. And I know when the city shut down Bell Park, you and your staff, and I thank you for this, went out of your way to make sure that people's belongings were put somewhere that they could pick them up safely. Do we still do that? Or if we go in, if bylaw goes in to clear out a couple of tents that are people living in the rough, do those become garbage, or do we actually store and leave a message for people that they can pick these up?
So through you, Madam Chair, yes, you're right. For the Bell Park situation, we came up with this specific approach. And again, this was a large encampment that typically, I mean, prior to Bell Park, we hadn't dealt with. I am going to pass it on to Ms. Boris, because she would be better equipped to answer this question.
Thank you, Ruth, and through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that question, Councillor Neil. We heard loud and clear that people's belongings were incredibly important to them. And to that end, the city made Cook's Arena available for storage. I was actually the one in charge of the storage location, and what we created were actually pods where each individual's items were stored, and there were multiple pictures taken, information provided, and reminders as to when. We actually kept items for 3 months. And I only had 2 individuals come by to claim items or to contact me in any way. I was hopeful that there would be more, but there weren't. So we did provide that and made sure that they were safe, dry, and well maintained. So I do believe that, and again, I can't guarantee, but I do believe that if the city were to be looking at having to clean out an encampment, we would make some provision. I don't know what that would be, but some type of provision around storage. The concern is when you have a lot of individuals with a lot of belongings, places fill up very quickly. So, Cook's Arena.
I appreciate that we did the right thing September of last year. What I'm asking is, are we continuing to do that practice today?
Well, we haven't had any encampments since then, but I do believe that we would continue that practice should we have to.
We haven't had encampments, but we've had people living in the rough who weren't there when bylaw came around, who lost all of their belongings. And I'm just asking, if you're suggesting it needs a motion from council, I'm happy to take a motion forward. But what I'm asking is, if it happens today, how can we ensure that those people aren't losing all of their belongings every 3 or 4 weeks because bylaw is picking them up?
So through you, Madam Chair, I think Councillor Neil, thank you for that. What we'll do is we'll take your question back. Because it certainly is, again, a collaboration between bylaw, street outreach, and other partners. I mean, I don't want to commit to that right now, but I definitely would like to take that back and have a further conversation with bylaw and public works and other partners to make sure that we can commit to something that would actually work logistically and health and safety and all of those pieces.
I appreciate that, and we all know we have in Williamsville, at the barns, at the Memorial Center, except for 2 weeks a year, we always have space we can store some things safely. So if you can look into that and keep me in the loop, that would be good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, am I safe to move forward now? All right, I think so. I don't see any more frantic waving, so let's move forward. So that was business item A. We're now going to move over to briefings. So briefing A, Ruth, Director of Housing and Social Services, is present to provide introductory remarks and introduce the committee, Dr. Carrie Ann Marshall, Assistant Professor for Western University's Occupational Therapy Program, who will speak to the committee regarding the Housing and Homelessness Committee. So I will now hand that over to you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. I will be incredibly brief because I think we're all extremely pleased with Dr. Carrie Ann Marshall, and I think a few more members that she has brought to actually do a briefing on her and her team's research that was done quite recently, and we're very lucky because I think the timing is fantastic with all the things that we've just discussed and will continue to discuss probably in this forum. I know I've not been as intimately involved in this process, but I know a couple of other members that are on the call today have been. And what I think is really great is that the research has focused. Whereas we, with our system review, obviously are looking at ways to innovate and improve the system as a whole in our community. This research is really complementary because it's also looking at kind of the path after homelessness and how to kind of maintain people, how to support clients during and during that kind of process of becoming more successfully housed and focus on the supports that I needed. So with no further ado, I know we had an hour and a half of really good conversations around encampments. And I think really looking forward to hearing from Dr. Carrie Ann Marshall and her team on this report, because I think it's a really great piece of information that we can utilize as a community moving forward. So with no further ado, I will pass it on to Dr. Marshall.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the committee for having us today. I just wanted to start, actually, I've been told that I have 10 minutes to present and that we would have a discussion after. Is that correct?
Yes, that sounds correct. We will, following your presentation, we will have committee ask questions, and then following that, the public can also ask questions.
Perfect. That's helpful. So I just wanted to, first of all, acknowledge that there are 3 people here with me today: Mr. Tom Greening, Ms. Ellie Lambert, and Oliver Hill, who you heard from just a moment ago. And all three of my my colleagues have been involved intimately in this work right from the very beginning. So, so the way that we had hoped to present this is that I would share this information. I would kind of whiz through this presentation, and that we would have some opportunity for discussion afterward. So my name is Carrie Ann Marshall. I'm an assistant professor at Western University, and though my job is actually in London, I live in Sydenham and have worked clinically in Kingston for several years, and I've worked with individuals who experience homelessness directly, both in my mental health work as an occupational therapist and I worked in actually in one of the local shelters for several years. So although I'm a researcher, and that's what I spend most of my time doing these days, I do actually have an intimate connection with people and with practice. So this project is focused, as Ms. Nordegraff pointed out, is focused on the transition from homelessness and really how we can support people to thrive following homelessness. Could we advance the slide? Okay. So I wanted to first start also by acknowledging that that this study couldn't actually be possible without the support of Western University, and the actual project was funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. Could you advance the slide? So the project, why did we kind of conduct this study in the first place? So what we've identified through a number of years of research now, particularly on Housing First, is that Housing First is actually very good at helping people to secure housing following homelessness. We know that when people are supported by Housing First, that they're housed for longer, so they have more nights housed, and they're more likely to find housing. But consistently in the literature on homelessness and Housing First in particular, particular, what we find is that after people leave homelessness, they're not necessarily what we would call thriving. They are often struggling with community integration, so they're not often integrated within their communities. Sometimes they use more substances. They talk about experiencing excessive boredom, which sounds like such a small issue, but until you talk with people who have lived experiences of homelessness about what this boredom can be like, so being completely cut off from engaging in activities that are meaningful often leaves people in a state of existential crisis, which actually affects their mental well-being in a whole host of ways that I could talk about in detail. They often talk about being excessively lonely. Sometimes when they leave, when they're unhoused and secure housing after, they're cut off from everybody that they knew, and now they're sitting in four walls and with nothing to do and nobody to connect with. And many of us would begin to languish if we were living in those circumstances. Many individuals talk about how they would like to be employed, but few people are employed following homelessness, and there are actually few services that support that. And sometimes people talk about using more substances, and this is sort of mixed in the literature that sometimes people are using more substances after leaving homelessness. And so often community services are set up so that they're kind of measuring their, your prime outcome measure is usually how many nights is a person housed. If they measure that at all, usually it's how many people have we housed this month. That's the primary outcome measure. And for me, that's a pretty low bar when we're trying to prevent homelessness. One of the best strategies for preventing homelessness, in my view, is actually by helping people to thrive following homelessness so that they become integrated within their communities and they can be successful and be housed for longer. And we heard this just to draw on the conversation around Bell Park. There actually are a number of urban encampments right now in Kingston, and they're just not visible to the public. And some of those encampments have been there for a number of years. And what we heard when we were talking with stakeholders in this project, and also, in the public discourse around the Bell Park situation, was that sometimes people who were housed were actually returning were actually forgoing their housing to live at Bell Park because they had a better sense of community there than they did while they were living in their own apartments. And for me, that's a particular problem. And highlights the need for helping people to thrive following homelessness. So the study itself was the methodology that we used was community-based participatory research. And this study was actually focused on helping to work alongside stakeholders to identify what kind of model can we create that will help people to thrive following homelessness. Housing First alone is not doing it. So what do we need to build onto Housing First? So I'm all about Housing First. I think it's exactly what we need to do. But what do we need to build on to Housing First to help people to thrive following homelessness? So that's what this project is about. And so right from the very beginning, we actually worked with community stakeholders, even when it came down to identifying what the research question was going to be. And I should probably say that this study is actually being conducted simultaneously in London as well. So we're doing this in 2 communities. Can you advance the slide? So this is kind of where we are in this whole process. So we've actually, we formed a community advisory board in January of 2019, and we conducted a stakeholder consultation with 51 individuals. So individuals with lived experience of homelessness, service providers, and leaders in the Kingston community. We summarized those findings. We conducted a thematic analysis of those qualitative interviews, and we developed this report, which I think some of you have, maybe all of you have, and if not, I'm happy to share it. And right now we're in the process of rolling that out in the community. So sharing it with anybody who wants to listen, to share kind of the experiences of stakeholders. And we're going to take that information then, and we're in April, we'll be conducting a sort of a broader stakeholder consultation where we'll present this report to the broad community. And then we will, and ask for their ideas on what kinds of solutions they see to associated with the recommendations that we've made, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. Once we take that information, we're going to actually share it among the broad, we're actually going to use that information to co-design solutions with community members. And then the hope is that we will be able to pilot that model in a future research project where we're actually evaluating it. Can you advance the slide? So we 19 individuals with lived experience, and these were not light interviews. The interviews lasted, from 30 minutes to an hour and a half or more, and we interviewed people who were both housed and unhoused, knowing that the individuals who were unhoused, had lived in housing before and knew what it was like to actually lose their housing and perhaps what they needed. And we asked them to identify what they needed to thrive following homelessness, and we were also asking them about the strengths and challenges of the current system of supports in Kingston. Would you advance the slide? We also conducted interviews with service providers and leaders. We interviewed 21 service providers and 11 leaders. And I won't go into detail about kind of where, what sectors they worked in. You can see it on the slide and it's summarized in the report, but I could certainly answer questions about that. And could you advance the slide? So we conducted a thematic analysis of qualitative data. We separated the interviews from individuals with lived experience and also service providers. So we analyzed them in two groups and then we kind of pulled them together. Individuals with lived experience generally said, everybody knows it. I'm not saying anything that anyone doesn't already know, but I'm not seeing much change in the city. Things have been the same for years and they haven't changed. And we're forced to live in a state of lack, was one of the themes that kind of came up in this research. People talked about how they didn't have housing options. The housing that was available to them was generally of very low quality. They highlighted the relationships between service providers and individuals with lived experience, and talked about how important that relationship was. Sometimes they worked well, sometimes they didn't, and it was actually that determined their trajectory. And you can advance the slide. I can talk about these in greater detail in the question and answer period. Service providers and leaders really emphasize this idea, and this is a quote from one of the service providers in these interviews. They said things like, we stick people in a house and say, okay, you're housed, the problem is solved. This idea that we actually house people, but then we're not always providing the supports that they need following homelessness. The stakeholders really emphasize that we needed to kind of that this is a systemic problem, that we're always putting out fires, and that there's some kind of systems level changes that are needed, that people need to be integrated in their communities following homelessness, but we don't exactly know how to do that. And then this large refrain that we were hearing from stakeholders, that they felt like they wanted to support people for longer following homelessness, but they were working within a system that was squeezed, that didn't give them all of the resources that they needed in order to support people for longer periods of time. They're just trying to get through the wait list. So really there was a lot of discussion about how the system is squeezed and not provided with sufficient resources to support this very complex population. And then could you advance the slide? So we worked with our community advisory board. We presented these findings to our community advisory board and came up with 9 recommendations collaboratively. So this happened over a series of meetings where we arrived at these recommendations, and then we actually co-wrote them together. And I won't speak to all of these. I could, but I just highlighted a few that I thought would be really important to discuss. So the first was this idea that systemic, systems changes are needed in Kingston. That there have been a number of different systemic issues in the Kingston community that have led to people languishing following homelessness. One of them that we heard loud and clear, particularly in the Kingston community, was that the housing that's available to people following homelessness is often of very low quality. Sometimes it's worse than living in a shelter or on the street. People talked about living with vermin and living with bed bugs and cockroaches and not having their apartments cared for. One participant that we interviewed had been actually living in a laundry room, which was an illegal suite. And the fact that the Kingston's vacancy rate has been historically low, and that perhaps there are some policies in place that have led to landlords being able to rent these kinds of units to people, then that we felt like that needed to change. Also, the fact that social housing has been poorly funded for several decades now, and is not available to people. The next recommendation that I thought I'd highlight was this idea of, just to build off of Oliver's point, perhaps he can talk about it in the question and answer period, but we need more peer support specialists and more lived experience at the expertise at the table. So in the peer support specialists that we should have should not be like I'll pay you $40 to, sweep the floor. It should be people who have consistent roles. They are who are provided with adequate training to do their work well, and that are not they don't have precarious situations. Peer support has been embraced by the mental health sector, but it's been slow to be uptaken by the housing and homelessness sector. And also, the idea of nothing about us without us. So at every single committee that involves, that relates to individuals who experience homelessness, there should be people with lived experience at the table, informing those discussions as they go. Next slide. The other thing that I thought I would highlight was how much we heard about how people who are working in this sector are working within a system that doesn't allow them to support people in the way that they think is the best way to support them. And so it's constantly, the system is squeezed. So the people who are supporting people within that system are trying to just put out fires and figure things out all the time. And when we interviewed stakeholders, service providers, they told us that, one person said, it's a miracle that I haven't burnt out yet. And so one recommendation that we have is actually, building a structure where we can we can actually support the emotional well-being of people who are working within this sector by providing adequate training, by maybe lightening their caseloads and making and funding the system a little bit better so they're not always feeling like they're in a state of crisis. And finally, the last recommendation that I'll highlight is that we heard from many people that harm reduction supports were available in the community, but when people decided that they wanted to stop using substances, which for individuals with lived experience, many felt that this was something that sustained their homelessness, and that was echoed by service providers, that when they wanted to reach out to reduce or abstain from substance use, those services were just not available in the Kingston community. And one of the recommendations that we wanted to make was to make those services more available, and particularly services that are oriented to the needs of individuals who are living with concurrent disorders. So people who have serious mental illness and also who are using substances. And if we could advance the slide. If you haven't accessed the report already, here's a link to the report. I'm not sure if you don't have this, the PDF copy of this presentation, I'd be happy to provide it to you. And I'd also be happy to provide you with a copy of this report. We want to distribute it as widely as possible. And then if you could advance the slide again. So the next steps in our process is actually to invite the broad community into further consultation, to ask the broad community about their ideas for how we can kind of, what solutions do we need to design together to help to support people to thrive following homelessness. And these are actually, we're going to be providing some public in-depth presentations of this report, and we're going to be inviting people to events where we'll ask them to collaborate on identifying solutions. So we're holding 3 different events that are listed here. And if anybody here would like to be involved, or if you know somebody who would like to be involved, please do reach out to me. If you could advance the slide. You can reach out to me at my email address, carrie.marshall@uwo.ca, and we could add you to the list of people who will participate in some of those events. So thank you very much. I think I went a little over time, so I apologize for that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marshall.
You're welcome.
And do we have questions from our committee members? Ms. White, go ahead.
Yes.
We'll start with Ms. White and then Councillor Neal. I also saw your hand following.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Dr. Kerry, I have read that report, and I'm finally happy to see that this is happening in Kingston. Before I lived in Brantford, and they did the same thing, and we actually created the Brant Community Response Team that actually, we ended up with over 25 organizations that would sit twice a week. And I was hoping when I came to Kingston that there was something like this here, but unfortunately there wasn't. I can tell you I was one of the original members, and the results that we received within the first 3 months were astronomical. It ended up helping all organizations, and it even ended up helping real-time stats so that people could go ahead and get grants. They could work collaboratively. So I'm really, really happy that this is happening. And if you would like more information on how it happened for us and the actual models that were used, I will be more than happy to assist in that, because this will be an amazing thing to happen for Kingston. So that's all I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I think, solutions that are co-designed should actually be co-designed with people who live in a particular community. And so I think, we have an opportunity here to develop something that is uniquely attuned to the Kingston context. And I think that's what you're speaking about with Brantford. I was born and raised in Brantford, by the way. So, yes.
Okay, we'll head over to Councillor Neal.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Marshall. That was an excellent presentation. Now I'm looking forward to us doing something about it. Couple of things. If I could ask our clerk to share the slide deck with your permission with the members of the committee, or possibly even all of council. And I definitely look forward to your finalized report being made available, even as correspondence to council would be great.
Okay, wonderful. So Councillor Neal, the report is actually widely available, and the slide deck I did share. So if that could be distributed to everyone who attended today, that would be lovely. And if you'd like to, if I could send you a copy, I'd be happy to send one to you.
That would be fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm curious, we have a number of transitional housing locations here in town that play a very important role in bridging from homelessness. Did you have an opportunity to speak to some of them, or I'm thinking of Dawn House and a couple of others?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So there were participants in the lived experience group that were residents of some of the transitional housing communities. So, and they, I mean, they said wonderful things about the services, and said and actually encouraged that, the availability of transitional housing. I mean, we're in a situation where, we've adopted housing first across the country, and that's exactly what needs to happen. Housing first tends to undermine the use of transitional housing. And I think a lot of communities across Canada are realizing that there is some usefulness to some of those transitional housing units. Although it's not permanent housing, so it's not ideal, but certainly there's some opportunity there to help to shorten a person's homelessness and help them to, prepare to live in permanent housing.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm also, and probably going to annoy my friend Tom Greening when I say this, but I also have some concerns, and I've brought this up with staff, that so much of our homelessness housing is dedicated to one provider, which I think is problematic, because we used to have a women's shelter supported by EFRI and the city. We've it's no longer in existence as far as I know. And the difficulty is that if I'm a woman and I go to one location and my ex-partner is there, that may influence whether I'm willing to stay there or not. If I'm on parole, and there's a lot of people in Kingston, the correctional services capital of Canada, that end up here in town. Again, if I go there and I have a former co-accused or another person on parole, I either have to decide to breach my parole or I have to go back out into the cold. And I'm hopeful that the city will go beyond just a single provider. In 2010, when I was first elected, we had 4, maybe 5 shelters that the city supported. And staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that we support some transitional housing, but we only have one homelessness shelter provider at this time, other than youth shelter.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that was highlighted by the stakeholders that we interviewed was that people need to be afforded options. So they need to be afforded options in housing, services that they receive, and so on. And well, you know, the study is not focused on homelessness, like on necessarily like the it's about improving conditions for people who are experiencing homelessness, but it's really oriented to helping people to thrive following homelessness. So we focus less on those services and more on how we can help people to thrive following homelessness. But one thing that did come out of our stakeholder interviews was that people wanted more choice and felt like they didn't have much choice at all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree.
I just want to say I've seen a few hands go up. I've seen Ruth, I've seen Tom, Francesca, and Tara. So I believe Ruth and Tom were probably in response maybe to Councillor Neal, and it was in that order. So Francesca, following any responses there, you will speak next, and then following that, so following Ms. Crete, we'll have Ms. Everett. Okay. Ruth, did you, I had seen your hand at one point, so just in case you wanted to speak.
No, thank you. I'm fine in mind of keeping mind of the time, and I would love to have members of the committee speak. So,
thank you. Okay, Mr. Greening.
Yeah, hi, Councillor Neal. I have heard that comment from you before, and just I've said this to maybe some of you on the committee and to others in the city in terms of services, especially for women who are homeless and need shelter options. You know, EFRI did provide, I believe it was 9 beds for homeless women, and for various reasons they decided to stop that service a couple of years ago. And the city did issue an RFP for new shelter beds for women. Home-based housing did put in a proposal to integrate those beds into the In From the Cold shelter with certain provisions. And in the proposal that we did submit, the second sentence in our proposal said that if there is any other organization that is bringing forward a proposal for shelter beds for females, we would withdraw our proposal. Because we also believe that there should be dedicated space for females in the city of Kingston. And on that point, I would say that I've heard you make that comment before, but it applies equally to youth. You know, we have the youth shelter and for youth and the In From the Cold for adults. They're both mixed gender shelters, and the issues that females could run into at the In From the Cold are similar to the issues that females could run into at the youth shelter. So it's a valid point, and certainly on a go forward basis, I do think that there should be some focus on that topic.
Thank you. Ms. Crete.
Yes.
Oh, Ms. Crete, sorry, you've just muted. You just muted.
There.
There we go.
So thank you, Madam Chair. And certainly thank you, Dr. Marshall. This is an amazing study and badly needed. And I look forward to hearing more about it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Creed. Ms. Everett.
Yeah, hi. I always like to go right after I put my hand up because then I forget what I'm going to say. I just want to say I really enjoyed the presentation, and it's nice to see you, Dr. Carrie Ann Marshall, again, and everyone as part of the committee. And I think this does give us, you know, a lot of hope within our community of continuation of collaboration, because I think it's really important to identify that, you know, the report is around transition and successful transition into housing, and the homelessness sector is only one part of that. And, you know, it is often the resources are very limited within the city, within the sector, and we need to really identify the collaboration of the other service providers around, such as addiction and mental health. And I just wanted to point out, you know, and I don't know the accuracy, but I just heard of someone trying to get into addiction treatment, and right now it's 3 to 5 year wait list. So it's really difficult to give people options and to give when there's limited resources available, and we can't you know, we can't blame that all on the homelessness system because the resources are limited throughout. And so, yeah, I think this gives us opportunity for that collaboration to bring those systems together to really work around solutions focused on our Kingston community. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks for making that point. And that is, I mean, that's really the crux of it, is that this, you know, this idea that, you know, when people move into housing after homelessness, that actually the whole community can come together, a range of services. And, you know, this idea of this long wait list for addiction treatment is an old story, and a story that is pretty hard to hear. After, you know, many of us have worked in this sector, you know, have worked with people over and over again, that when we try to refer them somewhere, then they can access those supports. You know, I'm working on another study right now focused on methamphetamine use and homelessness, and we've just been doing some interviews in Kingston. And what's fascinating to me is that we've interviewed 36 people so far, and every single one of them have a history of trauma. Every single one lives with the effects of trauma right now, and that was actually measured with a standardized measure. When we ask people about trauma, they cry. When we ask them about what they need, they often say that they want to stop using substances. And many of the people that we've interviewed have complicating mental illness. If you reach out to access support for substance use, and you're a person who's using substances on a regular basis, and you also have a mental illness, you know, those services should be available to you right now, not you know, 6 to 9 months down the road or years down the road, like you're saying, Tara, because by that point, there's a lot of damage that can be done. And, you know, in my view, it's about stigma. You know, the reason that we don't have these services available to people is because substance use is highly stigmatized.
I believe I saw Councillor Doherty's hand as well as Oliver Hill's hand, so we'll go in that order.
I actually thought Oliver had her hand up first, but I'm not sure. Okay, thanks. I just want to say thanks for including, thinking about the staff working on this issue. I think that was a really important component, and they needed to be heard too. I remember going to the ICH and watching staff there and the incredible work and hard work that they're doing and dealing with overdoses every day. And I'm not sure, I suspect we're not paying them properly, and we're certainly not giving them the support that they need. So my next question actually is typical counselor type of question. And are you going to be presenting this as well to other levels of government? Because we actually do need help. Like, we cannot solve this. This is a Canadian issue. This is a provincial issue, and it's on the municipal level. It's where people are feeling the need the most.
Yeah, so we certainly are happy to present to council, and our plan, our kind of knowledge mobilization plan involves communication with government representatives at all levels. And it's one of the reasons why we're conducting this project in 2 cities, so that it's not just one municipality, it's actually more than one. And we have a bit more. It's fascinating to hear some very, very similar stories coming out of London. So I don't think Kingston is alone, that's for sure. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So I would certainly, if there's an opportunity to present to council, I'd be very happy to do so. And I'm sure that Tom, Ellie, and Oliver would also be happy to do so. Volunteering.
We have provincial election and federal elections are coming up.
Yeah. Good timing. Yeah.
Thanks.
If you'd like to go ahead, Oliver Hill, as well.
Yes. I'm actually going to resign my hand because I want to be mindful of time, and also I think it's mirrored with what Carrie said previously.
Is there any other comments or questions? Ruth, do you have your hand up? Yes.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to follow up on the excellent comment by Councillor Dorothy. We are also in conversation. I think there's a good opportunity with the Ontario health teams and the overall kind of pathway on mental health to really bring these kind of reports forward. I know, again, these are not quick fixes, but I do think these types of research, very kind of community, based research will be very helpful. So I know city staff are at a couple of different tables and always will use the opportunity. And I think some people on this call are on some of these tables as well to bring these research opportunities forward. And I think that's also another reason why we asked Dr. Marshall to come and speak today, because I know you get tons of reports from us, but having some outside kind of evidence, I think, is also really helpful for our conversation locally.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nordegraaf. Okay, so if we do not have any further questions from our committee members, then I will open it up to members of the public. And again, I'll just remind that there is 5 minutes per member of the public to speak. And at the end, we will handle questions if there is any. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just before going to members of the public, I just wanted to note that at this point, we would be transitioning into the actual business items, section business item B, in order to have the public address the presenters as well as any questions for staff. I just wasn't sure if the committee had any questions related directly to the report that was included in the agenda that they might wish to ask staff, or if you'd like to go to members of the public and then return back to the committee for questions on the report itself. All right, Madam Chair, if you don't have a preference, then I suppose we can go to members of the public at this time. If they have any questions regarding the report for business item B or for the presenters that just concluded the briefing. If you have any questions, if you can please raise your hand in Zoom so that we might address you.
And sorry, I didn't realize you were asking me that. I thought you were asking if there were any committee members who had questions specifically to the report, separate from what we just gone over.
Not a problem, Madam Chair, not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing any hands at this time from members of the public. So if you wish to return to committee members.
Okay, so we don't have any questions or comments from members of the public?
Not currently, Madam Chair, no, there are no hands raised.
Okay. So I think we will move forward then from...
Oh, sorry, Madam Chair, I do see that Councillor Neal is raising his hand. He might have a further question regarding the report.
Not a question, just a quick suggestion. I think it's a really good idea, and I'll leave it up to Ruth to make it so. But if Dr. Marshall was available to do a briefing to council of this report, I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm available. I would love to.
Okay, great. So I think we can move forward then from business item B over to business item C. And I will pass this over to Ruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. And I do recognize that there are a lot of reports on the agenda. I know we passed on report item B, but this is the first time we are actually presenting the committee with a standing update. So you can expect this type of report on a ongoing basis. For reports, so again, and I know if there are any follow-up questions, we're always happy to respond to the report. So item C is the report kind of touching on the end of operating, end of mortgage kind of updates. So in 2018, we provided an update report to this committee and then onwards to the Arts, Recreation and Community Policies Committee with information on the end of operating, end of mortgages kind of process. As a service manager, we're obviously managing the various social housing projects, or we're funding and managing as a system these projects. Many of these projects the current mortgages of these projects will come to an end, and the funding that we're receiving from the federal government has been kind of going down as well. So moving forward, we are and kind of building on the reports that we provided to the committee in 2018, we've identified a couple of different principles to make sure that we can continue to provide the 2003 units that we're mandated to provide. And also we've provided a couple of principles that we use when we are in conversation with the social housing providers when their mortgages are coming to an end. So this report is really just an update on where we are in this process. We have had 3 providers where the mortgages have come to an end, and we have been able to kind of renegotiate a way of working with these providers moving forward. We also have introduced the option for portable housing benefits, which has really opened up another opportunity for us to provide housing solutions for members in the community that are in need of Ben-Geerte income level units. And I think the big kind of question mark that we've identified in this report is that we are still, again, because we're heavily legislated and kind of directed by the province on our social housing portfolio, we're really waiting for the bill kind of that has been, kind of changing. And I always forget the number of the bill. There we go. Bill 184, the Protecting Tenants and Strengthening Community Housing Act, which has been provided to us, but the details of the legislation are still kind of pending. So this is really an update report on where we are. And I know it's quite technical. I do have a couple of my colleagues on the call as well. If there are any specific questions, it is an information report, so there's no specific decision, but we just wanted to bring this forward to this committee as a follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nordegraaf, Director Nordegraaf. Is there any comments or questions from our committee members? In regards to item 8 of business, there are none from our committee members. Then I will ask our clerk again if there are any members of the public that wish to ask any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to do a call to the members of the public who are still with us. If you'd like to ask any questions with regards to this business item, please raise your hand, your virtual hand in Zoom at this time. Madam Chair, I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll move on from there. Before we move on to the next item on our agenda, I just want to say thank you to everybody for your discussion, for the comments, the questions, both from within our committee as well as those from the public who attended today, and everybody who is here to present or speak from our staff and so on. It was great, and that was a great presentation. Thank you very much for that. So we'll move forward now to item 8, which is motions. There are no other motions listed on the agenda. So I will move forward to item 9, notices of motion. There are no notices of motion listed on the agenda, but if there are any intents to bring forward a motion for the next meeting from any of our committee members, could you please note so now? Okay, seeing none. We'll move forward to other business. Again, I don't see any other business noted on the agenda. Is there anything anyone wishes to note for other business? Okay. For correspondence, we did have a few correspondence to review, and I want to thank everybody again who submitted correspondence. Thank you for these contributions. It's excellent to receive them, and I recognize there's a lot of passion and heart in our wonderful city. Thank you for submitting these. So we'll move forward from there to date of next meeting. The next meeting of the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee is scheduled for Thursday, June 10th, 2021. And we will move forward to adjournment at this point. I want to thank everybody again for your time and your heart today on these matters. And if I could have a first for adjournment. I saw Ms. McCarty's hand. So we've got a first, and for a second, Ms. Everett, Tara Everett. And if I could see all in favor, please, for adjourning. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's everybody. So that carries. Thank you for a great meeting, everyone. Wishing you a lovely afternoon.